Now for the exciting conclusion of May the Force Be With You on this episode of Pushback.
Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go.
If you're concerned about the direction our culture is heading, then maybe it's time to push back.
Greetings, everyone. This is Dr. Jonny again, and this is another episode of Pushback. You know, doing podcasts are certainly fun, and I've had some dear friends this week that my wife and I have been able to visit with, and it's been kind of a social week, and it's been wonderful. And of course, they're asking me, you know, what is on your heart, and what are the things that are stirring in you. At which point, of course, I have to mention William Wilberforce and this series of messages that I have been releasing. And podcasts are great, but I so wish really in my heart that I could sit in every one of your living rooms and look you in the eye so you could feel the passion that I have behind this. And I pray that the Holy Spirit and what is coming through in these messages will be conveyed in that way, in a personal way. Because I believe this is important. I believe that the message that I've been bringing in these series of messages are for now. I believe it's a now word. I believe it's critical to the time in which we live. And I'm so excited that you were willing to take the time to listen to it and to lean into it. So I really appreciate that. I always want to remind you that I love feedback. And so pushbackculture.org, you can go onto the website, leave feedback, and I would love to get back to you to discuss this because that's my heart. Marla wrote to me, "What a pleasure it is to listen to your insightful and inspiring messages through your Pushback ministry. An exceptional ambassador of Christ, your respect for people of all walks of life is evident. I encourage you to continue the path that you are on." Marla, thank you so much for those words, because that's exactly what it does, is it encourages me. And so I thank you because I believe this is important. I want to keep pressing on, and if we've learned nothing over the last 3 sessions about Wilberforce, is that persistence is key. And we're going to talk about that again today. I want to jump right into the topic because this is sort of the conclusion or part 4 of the May the Force Be With You series. And it's not a Star Wars force, it's a Wilburforce. And I've been leaning into the 19th century reformer and abolitionist William Wilberforce and his battle, his persistence on the war against the African slave trade and the ultimate abolition of that was one of the most remarkable reformational events of this century for sure. And there is so much to learn from this man and from his strategy that I believe it is for us now as we face what I believe is the greatest civil rights issue of our generation, and that is the issue of abortion. You know, Roe v. Wade was in 1973, that's 48 years ago, so we're coming up on its 50th anniversary. Interestingly, it took William Wilberforce about 50 years of his life to fight this, and he, before he died, saw it with his eyes. And that's my prayer. It's my prayer for this generation, that we would see it. We would see the abolition of millions of babies killed. Well over 50 million. Well over 50 million. So let me start this podcast because, you know, the first part of this podcast was really just an introduction to William Wilberforce himself, being called one of the greatest reformers in history. I love this quote from the book, and I use William Wilberforce, A Hero for Humanity by Kevin Belmonte. I read it, I dissected it, I highlighted it, I put it into my notes, I typed up pages and pages of notes on this because I believe this was for me, and this is now for you and for our culture. There was a quote in there that says, "Millions unborn will bless his name." They were talking generationally of what he brought and what he created for the African, especially generations that were taking place. But as I said many times before, there is a eerie similarity to what he was facing, to what we are facing today. And they said of him, millions unborn will bless his name. Interesting. It's interesting, because I believe that he was a reformer that we can learn from. And perhaps that prophetic word over his life will carry into our generation and our lives. So let me just give you a bit of good news. The climate is right. I've been saving some of this information for this conclusion, but the climate is right. There are new polls that have come out, and they asked evangelicals what are the major problems that they see in our culture today. And number one was abortion. 94% of respondents. That beat out personal debt, content of TV and movies, homosexuality, immigration. At the bottom was global warming. But this was at the top. And so from the evangelical church standpoint, this is still something that we completely care about. This is number one. Number one. So we should be encouraged by that. I should be encouraged by that as I'm releasing these podcasts to a majority of Christian audiences, although I opened it up certainly to all audiences, that there is a deep caring about this topic. Among all Americans, however, it's far fewer. It's about 50%. We've heard that 50% mark for quite a time. They call abortion a major issue that falls behind poverty and personal debt and illegal immigration, and even slightly behind global warming. So there is work to do. However, the target audience, the ambassadors of heaven, that's us. We are the ones who are targeted. We are the ones who see the value and see this as a major issue. That's kind of a first step, because if I'm talking to you all and you don't see it as a major issue, then this is going to fall dead, and we will just simply go through another 50 years of millions of lives lost. But here's the part that really heartens me. There is recent polls that show among Americans, 51%, when worded as, do you believe abortion is morally wrong? 51% believe abortion is morally wrong. That makes us a pro-life culture. I'm claiming that. But here's the part that really raises eyebrows, my friends, makes my heart beat fast. 72% of millennials believe abortion is morally wrong. What? Did you hear me right? 72% of millennials believe abortion is morally wrong. Only 19% of millennials support abortion on demand. Only 19% of millennials support abortion on demand. 19! That's it. My friends, this is the next generation. This is the generation that is taking political seats. This is the generation that is on social media. This is the generation that will be ushering in this culture of life. In the last election, there were unprecedented number of millennials elected into state offices. There was a 24-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 27-year-old, all in state legislatures. And when asked what was their principal motivation, each one said to get rid of abortion. Makes me smile. It makes me happy. My friends, this is encouraging news. This is encouraging news. So as we apply what I call Wilberforce Strategy, the things that we have been talking about in the last sessions. The first was talking about Wilberforce as the great reformer. The second part was about the man. In order to reform, you needed to be reformed. Make no mistake about it, that God and his heart and his message is central in this discussion and will always need to be central. Last week we talked about setting the stage, and Wilberforce's strategy was to do good, to make goodness fashionable. I actually wrote that on a Post-it note and slapped it up on my desk. Our goal is to make goodness fashionable. It's a cultural mandate that we have been given here on this earth. And by doing good, we actually become moral authorities in our region and in our area. And so one of the first things that we can do to tackle some big dragon like abortion is to actually implement and inject ourselves into all areas of culture and society and bring goodness and bring life and bring wholeness, because you can't legislate behavior. Legislation follows behavior. But real change happens in the heart, and Wilberforce believed that with multiple powerful quotes that I gave last week. But in this session, I want to apply that strategy now very specifically to this issue of abortion, what I consider the greatest civil rights issue of our lifetime. So remember, Wilberforce said multiple times, that we need to focus on the cultural, social, and ideological mores that allowed slavery to exist in the first place. Let's substitute the word. Let's focus on the cultural, social, and ideological mores that allowed abortion in 1973 to exist in the first place. We have to work on the hearts and minds of the American people. Wilberforce knew it. We know it. But that's where the battle must begin. So, strategy. Here we go. Let's make goodness fashionable. Let's talk about morality, and let's start with ourselves. Let's be a shining example of what goodness looks like. There are issues in our society of poverty and fatherlessness. It's a root issue of what is happening in this abortion issue. The fatherlessness rate, going even back to the 70s, has grown exponentially. And this podcast is going to spur on many other podcasts. I know fatherlessness is a whole podcast in itself. But abortion, at the heart of abortion, is a poverty issue and a poverty mindset that is also there as well. That we, as the Christian community, we can help with that. We can make some of those conditions improved and better, and walk through people so that the condition that allows abortion to take place becomes abolished. I've talked multiple times about evolution, and will continue to talk about evolution as a lifeless doctrine that is taught to our children every day in school, and yet we are expected to have some sort of moral, life-valuing existence. It's a real problem. As our kids these days are being raised and being told that they are purposeless accidents. And yet we're supposed to value one another. We're supposed to value people of different colored skin. We're supposed to value our authority. It's ludicrous. And evolution is at the very heart of it. And I won't use up all my time on that, but I ask you to reference my prior podcasts in that regard. There's a huge issue of identity. It's a huge word. It's what my wife and I teach on so frequently, because we have to know that we are loved sons and daughters of the Most High God. Identity is key. And abortion, the devaluing of life, comes from loss of identity. Identity is huge, and a huge topic. There's this issue of tolerance. I want to quote William Wilberforce. He said, I love this quote, "Exclusion in the name of toleration produces intolerance." Let me read that again. Exclusion in the name of toleration produces intolerance. We see the flag of toleration being flown everywhere. But really what toleration is that actually a rejection of others. We see this no stronger in the racial tension that's in our community right now. And as we try to increase our toleration, actually what we've been seeing is more intolerance towards one another. It's been actually the fruit. And really what we need to battle toleration is actually truth. So there's a huge opportunity for us in the culture that's here. The climate is right. The culture is here. Exposure. Let me make one more comment. There's a, as you know, a movement called Black Lives Matter. I'm sure everyone is familiar with that. I think that's a real opportunity because the last two words, lives matter. How does this apply to the unborn? And then exposure to the truth. Exposure to the truth. William Wilberforce said, and I quote, that he wants to try to master the subject of the slave trade and to obtain information from every available source. Every available source. He became an expert on the slave trade. This is Maybe the Force Be With You, Part 4, Part 2. I mentioned real briefly, I think in the very first session, there's a famous scene in the movie Amazing Grace where William Wilberforce takes the elite class to a slave ship and shows them the holding cells. And they all put their handkerchief up to their nose because of the horribleness and the smell. And he put their hands down and said, "You may not cover your face." He wanted them to smell it. He wanted them to show it. My friends, I feel like there's even a call in my life and in this podcast to talk about what we are talking about. Abortion has been reduced to this rhetoric, not understanding that there is something that's actually taking place that is horrific. And we feel like it's the sterile clinical procedure, and yet it is an absolute horrific event that's taking place every day behind closed doors. We have to expose the world to the truth of what is happening. As a physician, I believe I have a platform to talk about that, even from a medical standpoint, but also from a social, emotional, societal, and cultural standpoint. We need to become so well informed that we are actually abortion experts, so that when people ask us about it, we are authorities on what is happening. And we can always turn the conversation towards the child. Because this is what it's about. It's the sanctity of that child's life. It's always about life. And unless we know what is happening in that room, we can't comment on the specifics of what is happening. We need to become an intellectual authority. Also, an incredible practical strategy is to be the loudest. William Wilberforce, back in the 19th century, would implement arts and music and culture to carry his message. To carry his message. He actually had a catchphrase, and the catchphrase is, and I quote, "Am I not a man and a brother?" ? And he actually created armbands and brooches. We don't use brooches much anymore. But this catchphrase caught on so much that it actually moved from the British colonies actually to America as well, and became a catchphrase in America. It was like, "Just say no," or "Where's the beef?" These are catchphrases that everybody knew and embraced. He implemented strategies and music and song to actually carry his message. My friends, we are living in an unprecedented time of media, and we have at our access unlimited resources to carry a message of life. Film is one of the most powerful messages and venues that we can use to bring this into society. Films that are honoring. I quote from William Wilberforce's book, that the institution of slavery was a great moral evil. He condemned the institution without appearing to condemn those who own slaves. This, in combination with his vivid descriptions of the various abuses associated with slavery, made his book doubly powerful and effective. I cringe so often at movies that are made sometimes, even in the Christian realm, about abortion, because they have those that are pro-abortion just absolutely evil. And I cringe at that because they're people and often hurting people. And we need to engage them at that level. It's about changing hearts. I believe podcasts, if I may so humbly say, is a great way to get the message out. And I intend to be one of those voices. And I think one of the most important strategies that William Wilberforce used, as well as what we should use today, is to know how to talk about it. It's okay to bring up the specifics and to bring it into conversation. I wrote down to make it comfortably uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable conversation, so nobody wants to talk about it, so nobody does talk about it. One of the best strategies in discussing things with people is to ask them questions and make them state their position. Because so often people's position is simply anti what other people believe. And they're not actually saying out loud that I am an advocate to kill babies. They're not saying out loud that women should have the right to kill their child. It's not what they're saying. They're saying it many different ways, and it's mostly just anti-pro-life or taking something away. We have to know how to talk about it, to engage it, so that people actually understand what they believe, good, bad, and ugly. And finally, I want to say that the strategy, the greatest strategy that William Wilberforce had, is that he was uncompromised. He refused to back down. And I quote, "I confess to you, so enormous, so dreadful, or irremediable did its wickedness appear, that my own mind was completely made up for the abolition. A trade founded in iniquity and carried on as this was, must be abolition. A trade founded in iniquity, must be abolished. Let the policy be what it might. Let the consequences be what they would. I from this time determined that I would never rest till I had secured its abolition." My friends, that is the message and the decree that I am leaving you with, that we never rest. Everything happened as predicted. He had death threats. He had predictable tactics, warning that change in the institution of slavery would kill the national economy and the British way of life. Where have we heard this before? What are we going to do with all these millions of babies that are then born? It becomes an economic question when it's really a moral question. My friends, so often we're seeing, and we need to be aware, that abortion is actually brought out and becoming more extreme so that the baseline abortion becomes tolerable. Does that make sense? Like partial birth abortion and late term abortion and abortion at birth. These are being promoted so that when they get defeated, we all feel better about ourselves about just good old traditional abortion. No, we need to be uncompromising and refusing to back down. So I said at the beginning that the climate is right. Just a headline today is that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to be hearing a case in the state of Mississippi. The state of Mississippi has passed a law banning all abortions greater than 15 weeks. It's one of the more conservative bills that have passed, and of course it was knocked down by the lower courts and will be heard by the Supreme Court, a conservative Supreme Court. There is hope. The climate is right. These issues are coming forth. But let's make no mistake about it. I'm not satisfied with abortions under 15 weeks. I will celebrate the victories, and this is very important because this is a process, not an event. I want moments. I always think about Martin Luther King and that I Have a Dream speech. It was a moment. But what we've been fighting for in that realm, in segregation and with the slavery, it occurs over time. It takes time. I don't like that. I'm an impatient person. Actually, my wife would correct me. I'm not an impatient person. I'm working on it. But we need to celebrate the victories when they come. And they occur over time. So if this passes the Supreme Court, I'm going to celebrate this victory because that saves potentially millions of lives. We need to pay close attention to that Supreme Court case. But let's think locally. Let's act individually. We are in a very national, group-oriented mindset. And national and revival historians, I've been listening to David Barton. I really would commend him to you. He was saying that revival and historical changes and even awakenings actually occur on a local basis, not a national basis. And then things spread and grow from the local place. When we have a national and a group focus, we actually can be anonymous. It's my very big heartbeat of this podcast that we would never be anonymous. That every one of you listening to this carries a key role and a key piece in what we are striving for. William Wilberforce was one man, and I'm talking about him hundreds of years later because of what he stood for and what he impacted. He impacted a whole nation. He impacted a whole nation. I'd like to just end this series, this May the Force be with you, by reading a paragraph from his eulogy. Mr. William Wilberforce in public life forms one of the brightest pages in the annals of this country, so long renowned among the nations of the earth. By his exertion in the Senate, the heart of the nation was first impressed with the horror and degradation of his long-cherished traffic in human beings. His glowing eloquence inspired in others the feelings of humanity in which it had its source, and he had the glory of witnessing the triumph of that holy cause, to which he devoted all the energies of his gift and mind. In the deliverance of his country from the abomination of the slave trade, a confirmation well characterized by one of its ablest coadjutors as, quote, the saving of the soul of the nation, end quote. The feelings he mainly contributed to inspire can never die, and the people of this country, while they honor the name of Wilberforce, will fill their own highest honor in imitating the conduct of him, whose benevolence, founded on the sincerest piety, regarded the whole human race as friends and brothers. Imitating the conduct. The Apostle Paul said, imitate me. Jesus said, imitate me. Someone like William Wilberforce can be imitated because of what they stood for. My friends, this is about the conscience of our nation. This is about saving the soul of our nation. And it begins with you, and it begins with the heart of the people. I love you all. Thank you so much for listening. Bless you this week, and thank you for hearing my heart and listening to this important message. I pray that you would pass it on and spread the word, because this needs to go out to all the hearts of the people. But most importantly, it starts in your heart. So let's go together now to set and shape the culture.